Welcome everyone to the session on hybrid analytics. My name is Ingo Hilgefort. I'm a global product evangelist with SAP, and I will be your host for today's session. If we start looking at the topic of hybrid analytics, I'm sure you've seen yourself and your colleagues and other customers spending most of their money actually now into cloud products. But on the other hand, customers are actually investing into hybrid solutions. So the customers are not making a switch just like over the weekend going from on-premise into cloud, but instead actually hybrid solutions are very, very important. As you can see here, 60% of the customers that we actually asked mentioned that a hybrid strategy is very important for them. Even if you look at the bottom, you can see over 80% are actually saying that a hybrid approach is something that they are going forward with for a short period of time for sure. So as you can see, hybrid is basically, so to speak, the new normal when it comes to the deployment so that customers can actually leverage their existing assets. If we now look at the SAP portfolio, specifically if we're looking at the BI portfolio, we can see that we have two main areas. We have SAP Analytics Cloud as the cloud solution, and we have the long-standing BusinessObjects BI suite as your on-premise solutions. When we're talking about hybrid here, we're basically giving you an ability to leverage your existing assets. So with SAP Analytics Cloud, we made a big shift in terms of how the different areas from the products are coming together. On the business object side, probably most of you remember that we had a set of different products. Now with SAP Analytics Cloud, everything is coming together into one product, into one cloud offering. We're bringing together BI, augmented analytics, and even planning. And then on top, we have things like Analytics Designer, the Office integration, topics like Digital Boardroom, as well as the Analytics Catalog and Hub. So everything being together in one experience. If we're talking about hybrid, the connectivity is a very, very fundamental part of this. So before we go into the details, let's compare what's the difference between a live connectivity or an import connectivity. If we're using a live connectivity going from Analytics Cloud to your on-premise system, that means that we basically have real-time data every single time. We're not kind of like moving the data out of your corporate network. We're connecting live to the data. We're using your authorizations via single sign-on, and pretty much everything happens in real time. If we're using an import connectivity, now the data is being moved from your on-premise system, for example, a BW system, into the cloud. Now, this also has some advantages because that gives you actually access to all the features SAP Analytics Cloud has to offer. So let's take BW as the first part that we're going to take a look. And then in the second half of the session, we will take a look at the integration with the Business Objects platform and the universes. So if we take a look deeper into the live connectivity with BW, we can see that using the live connectivity, we can leverage, for example, your BW queries. We leverage your BW authorizations, and we actually even are able to leverage things as BW queries that have two structures, that have cell calculations, variables, hierarchies. We're actually able to leverage all the assets that you have as part of your BW query. So clearly, this is the recommended way to actually go from SAP Analytics Cloud to your on-premise BW system. From an import point of view, you do have the ability to import the information from BW into SAC. You can leverage your BW queries. And the benefit here is that you then can actually use all the features that SAP Analytics Cloud has to offer. For example, something like a smart discovery workflow. Before we go into a few feature highlights, I want to make sure that everybody is aware. We do recommend specifically for the integration of SAP Analytics Cloud and BW that you move to a BW 7.5 or a BW 4 HANA 2.0 system. To be specific, on the BW 7.5, we recommend SP16, and on the BW 4 HANA, we recommend the release 2.0. Those are the two releases that have all the latest and greatest integration features, and that's what you should actually be looking for. So to take a look at some of the highlights. So very common request from customers is the ability to blend information. And this is a key element of the live connectivity. So you can, for example, have a BW query coming out of your on-premise system, and perhaps you have something as simple as a spreadsheet. You, for example, have your actual data in BW and you have your plan data in a spreadsheet. So now you could upload the spreadsheet and then use the blending capabilities in SAP Analytics Cloud, combine these two data sets and actually create, for example, a chart, a table, a map that shows the combined actually information. Now, another important part is time series. And time series and date range filtering is two critical elements. Time series not only gives you the ability to actually show, for example, the revenue broken down by months, by week, by quarters, or even by days, but it also has a very important feature, which is forecasting. So, for example, you can leverage a query coming from BW that has a time dimension included. And in this case, time dimension means actual dates, for example, like a calendar month, a calendar week. And you could actually then run a forecast. For example, let's say we have the revenue for the first 3 quarters of the year, and we want to see, based on those 3 quarters, what would be a forecast. The date range filtering is interesting because probably a lot of you are using exit variables in BW to do this today. But you can also use this in SAP Analytics Cloud and give the user perhaps a little bit more flexibility and a different experience in choosing date and time ranges, comparing current years with previous years, comparing current months with last month. Those kind of workflows are fully supported now with the BW Live connectivity. Another very important part with the live connectivity is the map support. So with BW 7.5 and BW 4, we do support actually with live data that you create maps in SAP Analytics Cloud, and you can actually create, for example, a choropleth map based on the information that you have in BW, and then show, for example, the revenue, the cost, the profit along the map. A data analyzer is a very interesting feature. We actually delivered the data analyzer quite some time ago already, but we keep actually mentioning it. We want to make sure that everybody is aware that this is an option as part of SAP Analytics Cloud. The data analyzer is comparable to what some of you actually know as the BEX web reporting. You don't have to create a model. You simply actually connect to your BW system. You choose the BW query, and then the end user has the ability to choose which dimension goes to the rows, which goes to the columns, which measures they want to see. They actually can all do this at view time. So they don't need to have an edit write as part of SAP Analytics Cloud. And they can completely change basically which dimensions they want to see, how they want to slice and dice the information live out of your BW system. Variances are a very important part, and again, fully supported now with the live connectivity. Variances could use versions or actually time-based. So as an example for a version-based variance, this would mean you have actual data and you have plan information. Remember the example we talked about, the actual information coming out of BW, your plan coming out of a spreadsheet. And then you can actually use something like an IBCS standard to color code your variance. As you can see in the chart here, We have, for example, the columns in black, which is our actual, and then the other columns that you can see, they follow a pattern. So they basically a forecast. There's certain rules behind how these versions are actually color coded. And on top, you see the variance with green and red showing, are we actually doing well or are we not doing as well as we hoped? A time-based variance can have lots of different flavors. It could mean we're comparing a year over year, could mean we're comparing with the previous period, for example, comparing October with September. So those are actually different options that are all possible now with the live connectivity. The query merging is a very important feature when it comes to performance. Imagine you have a dashboard that, let's say, opens up 6 queries out of your BW system. Now, these 6 queries could all ask for different information. But what if, for example, there's a query that asks for revenue broken down by country, and another query is asking for the cost broken down by country? So instead of actually asking for 2 queries, what we could do is now take this information and run 1 query. That is exactly what we call query merging. So instead of running query 1 showing revenue by country, query 2 showing the cost by country, we do 1 query that brings back the revenue and the cost broken down by country. So it saves us connecting from multiple times to the system, and it saves us overhead. Another important feature is for those customers that make use of queries with 2 structures, which is a large group out of our BW customers. In the past, there were a few limits when you use queries with 2 structures, but we did actually remove some of those already. As you can see, you actually have the ability in the table now to use the in-cell charts, which is very interesting from a visualization point of view, and will also allow you now to use thresholds actually on queries that have 2 structures. Another very important point that we actually did is we completely changed the prompting UI. And there's several things that actually, you should notice, starting from that you can actually use a copy and paste. Similar that from other products, you can actually have, for example, multiple prompt values, let's say sitting somewhere in a text file. So you could actually select them, copy, and then paste them into the prompting UI of SAP Analytics Cloud. The other interesting part is that as part of the search that you have, when you look for a certain prompting UI, you can also reference attributes. Let's say you're looking for a certain kind of customer and you don't know the customer number out of your head. So you could, for example, use something like customer classification, which could be an attribute, and restrict the list of customers already in the search to just make it easier for you to find the right customer. Another important part is that you now have the ability to create restricted measures. And in this case, restricted measures refers to creating a restricted measure in SAP Analytics Cloud. And you can do that now with actually already existing restricted key figures. So you could have a restricted key figure. Let's say you created the revenue for 2020, and you can then use that restricted key figure again in another restricted measure in SAP Analytics Cloud. So it gives you that ability as well now. So before we switch over to the universe details and the integration from SAP Analytics Cloud with the BusinessObjects on-premise system, just want to highlight a few links here that I included into the deck. So you can see there's a list of unsupported features. There's some version dependencies. So depending on which version of BW you're on, you actually want to double check. Perhaps you have to apply some notes. And then you can see there's a complete list of all the elements that we do support when it comes to the integration of SAP Analytics Cloud with BW. So now let's switch over to the connectivity with the universes. So with BusinessObjects as a BI platform, as an on-premise solution, we have a large set of customers that are making use of the actual universe in combination, for example, with Web Intelligence and, for example, crystal reports. The key part is the universe is basically acting as a semantic layer in your case. And when you're moving to the cloud, so in this case, which means SAP Analytics Cloud, we want to give you that ability to leverage these assets that you invested into over time. And this could mean basically connecting to it, and we coming kind of like into more details how this looks like. So when you basically start the integration between your on-premise business object system and SAP Analytics Cloud, you will notice that you can actually start from SAP Analytics Cloud and connect to your universe. So now that gives you automatically access to all the assets that you have created over years. We're actually able to leverage the metadata that you created. We're able to leverage the information. Perhaps the universe connects to like a SQL Server, Oracle, perhaps to an IBM database, regardless of what the underlying data source is right now. SAP Analytics Cloud is able to actually leverage those details that you created in the universe, expose it to the end user, and they can actually use the familiar environment and then in the cloud create their new dashboard. So what are some of the things that you actually are able to do that perhaps on the business objects side you have been actually waiting for and you wanted to leverage those capabilities? One of the items being search to insight, the ability to basically search across the data, search across the metadata. Simply ask a question kind of like, what is the revenue for 2020 in Canada? And actually the system being able to go into the list of metadata, go into the data and start suggesting some of the answers. We talked about the augmented BI, things like smart insight, smart discovery. So basically an automated insight on top of your data. And then last but not least, remember we talked about the time series, we talked about like the forecasting, the predicting kind of like workflows that you now have as part of SAP Analytics Cloud. So when we look at the integration, you start with your business object system on-premise. You have your semantic layer, you have your BI platform, you have your user management, you have Web Intelligence as a reporting environment, you have Lumira Designer for analytical applications, you have Analysis Office, so for your kind of like, people that want to use the Excel environment. And then on the right-hand side, you have SAP Analytics Cloud. Everything combined in one environment, in one user experience, and cloud-based. So you don't have to worry about applying a service pack, applying a patch, perhaps, scaling kind of like the server to a certain kind of workflow. So what exactly are the items that we're now enabling with the hybrid integration? So first of all, we are actually giving you an option to connect to your universes. You can actually do so with the Business Objects Release 4.2, and you can also use 4.3, obviously. It starts with 4.2 Service Pack 5. But we didn't actually stop at the universe part. We're also allowing you to use the Web Intelligence as a data source. Now, this means Web Intelligence in terms of reports. So the benefit here is that you can actually use something like a calculation that you created for a specific report, and you can use that now in Analytics Cloud. An interesting part for the administrators that are listening, we also created a hybrid user management. You can actually leverage the users from your on-premise solution as part of the cloud integration. And then last but not least, you can see on top, we have the analytics catalog. You can actually use the analytics catalog as the single point of entry for all your users, and you can publish the content from your business objects on-premise system towards the analytics catalog. So now what does it mean from an administration point of view? So we actually are able to give you the users that you have from your business objects on-premise system, and you're actually able to provision these users into Analytics Cloud. So you don't have to recreate the hundreds of users and thousands of users that you have on your business objects on-premise system. You can simply reuse those as part of SAP Analytics Cloud. In terms of Analytics Catalog, you do have the ability to actually publish the content from your business object system into the Analytics Catalog. So in that way, the Analytics Catalog becomes a single entry point for all your users. All the metadata that you actually have provided already for your reports is actually leveraged as part of that integration. When it comes to the connectivity, we already talked about the connectivity from SAP Analytics Cloud towards your BW system, but with the universes, we actually have two options. We can connect to the actual universe, and we can connect to the Web Intelligence report. It's very important that the live connectivities that we have are actually designed in a way that the data that you have is not leaving your corporate network. So basically you're safe here. It's not that we're actually bringing the data into SAP Analytics Cloud, caching it somewhere, and then report on it. The information is actually not leaving your corporate network. So now, what does this actually really mean for the end user? The end user now has the benefit, they can leverage the existing assets. You've been using the BusinessObjects BI platform for quite some time. They understand the universes. They understand the Web Intelligence reports. They know kind of like all the business terms. They know all the dimensions, the measures, the calculations, and they simply can reuse this now and start using SAP Analytics Cloud. So you're giving them basically a head start actually by providing them access to all the existing assets. Your business user doesn't have to learn kind of like what queries or kind of like what kind of like data models do we have now. Instead, they can leverage their existing assets, but can now experience the additional options in SAP Analytics Cloud, such as the smart insights, the maps, the charts, the tables. Again, as I mentioned, with the live connectivity for the universe part, you can see we're starting with the release 4.2 SP5, and we're actually able to connect to the universe. So you will see in a few minutes actually how this looks like. You basically will receive a query panel, you can choose the dimensions, and then actually build your dashboard. On top with the release 4.3 for the Business Objects platform, we now do actually allow you not only to connect to the universe, but also to leverage the Web Intelligence reports. So that gives you access to, things like calculations, perhaps you merge different kind of queries together. You created kind of like a new, query out of multiple different scenarios, and all those can be leveraged then in combination with SAP Analytics Cloud. So let's take a look at an example workflow. How would we connect from SAP Analytics Cloud to a universe and then create a story? So first of all, obviously here we are in SAP Analytics Cloud. We're logged into the system. And the first item we do is that we actually create a new model. So we actually then choose that we want to connect to a data source. And in our case, it is a live connection. And we're choosing that we want to connect to a universe. So after we actually selected the connection and we selected the universe, we're given the very typical query panel that probably most of you have seen using Web Intelligence. You get a list of dimensions, a list of measures. You can choose which elements you would like. You can, if you want, apply certain kind of filters. Now, this then actually creates the context of what you're going to use with your dashboard in SAP Analytics Cloud. So because we're creating a model, you're actually shown the list of measures and the list of dimensions that the system was able to recognize. So here we see the list of measures, but we can also go to the dimensions. Now the dimensions offer a very interesting part. You can actually group them. Similar to what you're used to from the universe layer, you can do this in SAP Analytics Cloud as well. You can see the dimensions, but you can also apply the different kind of groups, which then organize your list of universes, your list of dimensions, and specifically in case you have a large list, this is very, very helpful. So then we basically go in and create a new story. So we say that we want to build a new story. We choose what kind of page we want. Then we're able to choose if we want to start with a chart or a table. Do we want to build a map? And then we actually ask what our model is. So in our case, we use the model that we just created. And in case we have any kind of prompts, we're being asked to actually either, in case it's optional, we can continue. If it's mandatory, we have to provide the values. So we actually open up the list of members. We can choose what we would like. And then you can see in our case, this is an empty chart, but we can then actually start building basically our chart based on the information that we receive from the universe. So now you can see we can basically choose dimension, we can choose the measures, we can change things like chart type, colors, all those things are possible. What you see right now is basically a list of limitations, and I will also give you an updated link as part of this slide deck where you can check on a regular basis. Those are limitations that we currently are working on in terms of actually resolving this. So this is not like a list of, so to speak, permanent limitations. This is the limitations as of today, and we're basically working on actually closing these items. So these are actually elements that are not fully working yet when it comes to the live connectivity with SAP Analytics Cloud and the universe layer. So here are the links that I mentioned. There's a few kind of links that I want to highlight. So first of all, there is a very extensive wiki on our websites that shows a few best practices. And you can also see there are several links that show what is actually supported, what is not yet supported, and what are some of the timelines that we're actually working towards to make sure that we're closing these gaps. I want to also highlight a few other sessions that you can see here, which are probably very interesting for you as part of the overall TechEd experience. You can see there's a session around integrating SAP Analytics Cloud with the Data Warehouse Cloud. Would also highly recommend you take a look at the roadmap for SAP Analytics Cloud. I would also recommend the strategy talk with our leadership team around kind of how you should leverage your data and what we as SAP can provide you there. And then you can also see there is a session on a Data Warehouse Cloud overview, specifically for the users from BusinessObjects. It might be of interest as the Data Warehouse Cloud also provides a semantic layer approach from an overall data management point of view. I also want to highlight actually elements such as the Learning Hub. So the learning shouldn't actually stop after you watched some of the sessions at TechEd here, but you do want to actually take a look at Learning Hub. You can see there's even kind of the option to have a free access here, which gives you access to learning rooms for the different products, so that even when TechEd actually has passed, you can still continue your learning experience based on the products that you would like to actually learn more about. Now with this, I want to say thank you to everyone for watching and listening, and I hope you enjoy your experience with the SAP TechEd.